Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Emma, also known as Made in the Moment. I knit and crochet and write patterns and sometimes make video tutorials. Today I'm going to be showing you how I knit this tank top that I'm wearing. I also made another version of this, and this is one of my most worn pieces because it is so simple. It's a really nice beginner project. You can play around with yarn weights, use yarn scraps. You can do it all in one color if you want, in one yarn weight. There's a lot of options. Please tag me in any pictures or videos that you post of you making this pattern. I just love seeing all of the things that you guys come up with. It's super fun. If you like my work and want to support me further, you can follow me on Instagram or TikTok. I post on there much more regularly. And I just started a Patreon as a yarn fund for my testers. So all of the money that I make from Patreon will go towards covering material costs for my testers, my pattern testers. At the moment, there's only a few things up there. There's a Discord and about 6 or 7 free charts, but I already have some exclusive content that is in the works that just needs to go up there. You will also get early access to all of my YouTube videos. If you have any questions about the pattern, then you can leave them in the comments below and I will respond to them as quickly as I can. But that's all I have to say. Let's get into the video. So what you're going to need is 2 different weights of yarn. I have this chunky, like roving weight yarn, and then this lighter cotton yarn. Both of these were gifted to me from Stitch and Story. This first one is 100% acrylic, but it looks and feels like wool, but just a little softer. And then this other one is called the Daydreamer, and it is a cotton and soybean fiber combination. It's really lightweight and also super soft. So what I'm gonna use with these is 10mm needles, which is the suggested size for my thicker yarn. I'll show you the swatch that I made. So this is kind of the look that I'm going for, where the thicker yarn is a little bit of a tighter knit, and then the thinner yarn is loose, kind of mesh. The first thing you're going to need to do is actually knit a gauge swatch. Unless you are comfortable kind of freehanding and estimating things, I would highly recommend doing this before you start. So what I did is I knit about a 5x5 inch square, and I'm going to explain kind of the math that you have to do to figure out how many stitches you want to cast on for your project based on the gauge swatch. Even though my swatch is 5 inches by about 5 inches, I'm actually gonna measure gauge on a 4x4 square, just so it's kind of on the inside of the knit, because usually when you knit things, the edges are a little bit different than the center of things. So for a 4x4 square, my gauge is 9 stitches across by 12 rows. So this is kind of going to depend on the yarn that you're using and your stripe pattern. The important thing is the horizontal gauge. So I have 9 stitches across 4 inches. Then what you're going to need is your bust measurement. So this is basically the largest part of your chest. So for a lot of people, that's kind of like at the bust, but it might be at your waist, just depending on kind of what your body is shaped like. So for me, that measurement all the way around is 30 inches at the widest point. And then I added 4 inches of positive ease, which just makes the garment fit a little bit looser. If you want it to be even looser, you can add more, or you can subtract some, or keep it the same if you want it to be a little bit more of a tight fit. But for this design, I like it to be loose. 30 inches, I'm gonna add 4, so that's 34, and then I'm going to divide that by 2. So the width that I want my front panel to be is 17 inches. And the way we're going to use the numbers that we already have to figure that out is to kind of do a ratio equation. Okay, so I'm going to go through the math a little bit. So this is the number that we got after dividing the bust measurement plus positive ease by 2. 34 divided by 2 is 17. And my gauge was for 4 inches by 4 inches, 9 stitches for 12 rows. So this is the ratio that I was talking about. We know over 4 inches, there are 9 stitches, and I counted the roving, the thicker one, because this one is just going to be I mean, it's going to kind of sit in the same spot, but I think the best place to measure is the roving, because this is what I'm going to start and end each panel with. So over 4 inches, we have 9 stitches. So what we need to figure out is over 17 inches, how many stitches there are. So I've set up the equation like this just so it's easy to see what I'm going to do next. Basically, you're going to multiply across the equal sign. So you have 9 times 17, which is here, and then 4 times X amount of stitches. First, we're going to multiply this side, have 153 and 4X, and then you want to get the X by itself, so you're going to divide this side by 4, just like this. And that number is 38.25. And you're just going to round to the nearest whole number. Since I already added positive e's, I'm going to round down to 38. And since that's how you round that number anyway. So I'm going to cast on 38 stitches to make a panel that is 17 inches wide. So I have my 10mm needles here, and I'm going to do a long tail cast on. And there's not a perfect science to this, but I just pull out what looks like a good amount of yarn, and then I'm going to tie a slip knot and slip this onto one of my needles. So I'm going to slip the slip knot onto my needle and tighten it. And then the long tail is going to go over my thumb and into my hand like this. And then the working yarn, so this is the side that's attached to the ball of yarn, is going to go over my finger like this. So my fingers are kind of splaying out like this. And I'm going to pick underneath here and then go around here and pull this loop over. I'll show that to you again slowly. Go under here and under here. So it's important that you're holding it correctly just so that it picks up the right loops. So as a reminder, this is how I'm holding it: under here and under here. And just pause this and do that as many times as you need to figure it out. But I'm going to cast on 38 stitches like this. I have cast on my 38 stitches, and now I'm going to show you how to start the first row. So you're going to insert your needle into your first stitch, pull the yarn around, pull through, and then drop that stitch off of your needle. And just continue on like that. Until you get to the end of the row. So these are knit stitches, and this is the right side of the work. So like the side that will be facing out. If you prefer to knit continental style, here's how I do that. So I put the yarn under my middle finger and then over my pointer and ring finger, and grab the yarn with my needle instead of yarning over. And I find this to be a little easier. I know sometimes people who crochet prefer this style of knitting. Once you get to the end of your row, you're going to turn your work, and you'll see the back of the stitches have these little bumps. And on this side, we're going to do purl stitches. So instead of going into the stitch like this, you're going to go in from back to front and knit the stitch like this, or purl the stitch, rather. So back to front and around. And I'll show you how I do this continental style, kind of. It seems like there's a lot of variations of continental purl. I hold the yarn the same, but I use my thumb to kind of direct the yarn on purl stitches. And then I'm going to purl all the way to the end of the row. And basically you're just going to repeat this pattern of knitting one row, purling one row, until your roving section is the length that you want it to be for your first stripe. So there's not really any specific guideline that you have to follow, but I'm probably gonna do between 6 and 10 rows. I'm happy with this width for my first stripe, so I'm going to switch from this yarn to my thinner yarn. So I like to start off by tying another slip knot, and then on my first purl, instead of using the old yarn, I'm going to use the new yarn, tighten the knot, and pull through. So for the first stitch, the slip knot is basically the stitch. I like to tie the old yarn and the tail just to secure it. And then I'm going to cut this yarn. So I have one stitch in my new yarn, and for the next stitch, I'm going to just purl as normal. And once you come to the end of this row, then you're just going to turn your work and knit back the other way. So I ended up doing just 2 rows of this lighter blue, and now I'm going to switch back to the white again. So I'm going to do the same thing where I tie a slip knot and do my first stitch with the slip knot. Pull through, and then I'm going to secure these with a double knot. And then cut this, and then continue on with this new color. And the way this pattern works, you are basically just going to keep knitting up in a rectangle until your panel gets to the length that you want it to, kind of from where your collarbones are down to however long you want it to be. I'll show you on the other sample kind of what that looks like. So this is just straight up on the sides, right from the bottom, straight up until we get to just this last little part. And I'll show you when we get here, but we'll just cast off some in the middle, leave some stitches on the shoulders, and then make a back panel that is identical. All right, so this is what I have so far. I am ready to cast off some stitches in the middle for the neckline. So basically the way that I am thinking about this is I want my shoulder sections to be 4 inches wide. So I'll keep 4 inches worth of stitches on each side and work those up and then cast off everything else in the middle. And if you remember from your gauge swatch how many stitches equals 4 inches, then you just knit that many. So for me, that's 9. So I'm going to knit 9 stitches. And then I'm going to mark off 9 stitches on this side. So you can use a stitch marker, but I'm just going to use a little piece of scrap yarn and count from the edge. And mark in between these stitches. And then I'm going to cast off all of the rest of these stitches in here. So knit 2 and then pull this stitch over. You can choose a stretchier cast off or bind off method if you prefer, but this one is fine, I think, for the neckline because it ends up being pretty wide anyway. And then we are going to add a border onto this after. And then when you get to your marker, you can just slip this off. You don't need this anymore. You're going to knit one more stitch past the marker and then bind that off. So that'll leave you with 9 stitches on this side, and knit to the end of the row. So what I like to do at this point is just leave these other stitches kind of on this needle as I work up the side of the shoulders. And I would recommend knitting about 2 inches up from this point. So however many rows it takes to get about 2 inches, you can do shorter if you want like a higher neckline, or longer if you want this to be a little bit of a lower neckline. And at this point you can kind of just hold it up to your body and see how it falls. So I'm just knitting these, or I'm purling these 9 stitches. So just turning and then knitting as usual. So I have knit for about 2 inches here, and now I'm going to cast off on this side and reattach my yarn to the other side. So casting off will look the same as it did for my neckline. You can cast off on a knit row if you prefer, rather than to do it while you're purling. But it's the same concept either way. So once you get to the very last stitch, you're going to cut your yarn on this side and then pull that loop through and tighten it. So now we're going to go back to this side. And if you remember, we started this row by knitting across. So we already have one of these knit rows basically done on this side. So you're going to reattach on the purl side, and you can do it the same way that you did your other color changes. So starting with the slip knot, putting it on purlwise, and then starting to purl. So you can either make this side of the shoulder symmetrical to what you did on the other side, or you can make it different if you prefer. But I would recommend making it the same length at least, even if you do a different stripe pattern, just so that the shoulders hang evenly when you wear it. But yeah, I'm just going to finish this side of the shoulder and bind off, and then I'm done with the front panel. For the back, you're just going to repeat the exact same thing. You can either make the stripe pattern symmetrical to what you did on the front, or you can make it different. It's just totally up to you. But go ahead and make 2 of these panels, and then come back and I'll show you how to seam it together and add the crochet border. So I finished both of my panels. They should end up the same size. And I'm going to show you how to sew them together. So you're going to want to turn them so the wrong sides, which is the inside the purl stitches, are facing each other. So you're going to have wrong sides together, and you're going to start by sewing up the shoulders. So I cut a length of yarn. This is definitely going to be too much, but I can always trim it again. So I'm going to thread my yarn needle and attach the yarn just right into the corner here on my first panel. You know what, I'm going to actually trim this a little more. So I pull it almost all the way through and then just tie a knot. And then from here, I'm going to go across to the other side and insert my needle across one of the stitches like this and pull through. And then go back to this first side where I attached the yarn and go into one of the stitches like this, horizontally. Then go back to the other side and go underneath 2 of the bars of the stitch like this. And just repeat, going back and forth all the way until you get to the end. Then once I get to the end, I like to just tie it off with the other yarn tail. And it looks kind of messy right now, but once you weave in all the ends, then it'll be much better. So that's what the seam looks like on the right side, and this is what the seam looks like on the wrong side. Then you're just going to repeat that on the other shoulder. And once you've done that, I'll show you how to connect the sides. So the easiest way I've found to figure out where I want the sides to connect is to just try the top on and then use a stitch marker or like a little scrap piece of yarn to kind of mark where I want the sides to connect. So you can see I have left a pretty large armhole here. Just for this kind of like fit of tank top, I prefer like really, really long armholes, or really big ones, I guess. I just like it to be super loose and not like tight on my armpit. If you want it to be a little more fitted, then you would probably sew it up like up to here. But for me, I'm gonna have it all the way down here and just really have like the bottom part connected. I'm going to thread my yarn needle. And then instead of going into the stitch across like we did when we were sewing up at the top, you're going to go into the bar that's in between the stitches. So this is an invisible vertical seam. So you're going to go into the bar that's right in between the stitches, pull through, and when you get to a section with different weight, then you'll just do the same thing in these stitches. So going into the bar in between the stitches. And once I get to the top, I'm going to tie it off. And this is what it looks like. It's a fairly invisible seam here. I'm going to repeat this on the other side, and then I'll show you how I add a crochet border around the edges. So this is the little crochet edge that I'm going to show you how to do. It is 1 row of single crochets and 1 row of double crochets. I'm using an 8mm crochet hook. The recommended size for this yarn weight is 10mm, which is the same as the size for the knitting needles, but I'm sizing down a little bit just so that the stitches are a little tighter for the border. So the first thing I do is I tie a slip knot. And then I like to start my row at the bottom of the armpit, just so it's the least noticeable. So you're going to put your crochet hook just into some of the stitches and pull the slip knot through, tighten it on the hook, and then chain 1. So to single crochet into the fabric like this, you're just going to insert your hook, pull through, and then yarn over and pull through again. And that's 1 single crochet. I'm also crocheting over some of the tails under here, just so I don't have to weave them in later. So here's that again. I'm going to insert my hook, pull through my working yarn, yarn over, and pull through. So insert, grab the yarn and pull through, yarn over, pull through. And I'm just going to keep doing that all the way around the sleeve When you get to kind of the lighter weight sections, if you have those, just kind of do the same thing. I like to make sure I grab at least 2 of these yarns because they're a little thinner. So you're just going to do that all the way around. And once you make it back to the beginning of your row, then I'll show you how to do the next row. Okay, so I've made it back all the way around to where I first started. So I'm just going to insert my hook into the top of that first single crochet that I made, yarn over, pull through, and then pull through this loop. So that's a slip stitch. And then for the double crochet row, I'm going to chain 2, yarn over, insert my hook into this single crochet here, pull through so that I have 3 loops on my hook, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And I'm just going to make 1 double crochet into each single crochet. So yarn over, insert your hook, grab the yarn, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. So I've made it all the way back to my first stitch. So I'm just going to make another slip stitch, insert into the top of this double crochet, grab the yarn, pull through, and then pull through again. And then I'm going to cut the yarn and pull this all the way through and pull this tight. And now I have my finished border for the sleeve. And I'm going to do pretty much the same thing on the neck hole, or the neckline, I guess is a better way to say it. So I'm going to start with a slip knot, and then I like to start on the shoulder. So I'm just going to insert my hook here into this mess of knots, pull through, and chain 1. And I'm going to start with a row of single crochets again. I think this just provides like a really nice flat space for the double crochets to sit on. And you see there's this kind of gap from where you cast off before. I like to just kind of ignore this as if that's not a stitch. So I'll insert my hook right into the cast off stitches, and you see that kind of just closes that gap together a little bit. Once you get back to this first single crochet, you're going to insert your hook and make a slip stitch. So pull through, and for my second row, I'm actually going to do a row of half double crochets instead of double crochets. So to do a half double crochet, you're going to yarn over, insert your hook, pull yarn through, and this kind of looks like a double crochet, but instead of yarning over and pulling through 2, you're going to pull through all 3. So yarn over, insert your hook, grab the yarn, yarn over, pull through all 3. Yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over, pull through all 3. This just makes a slightly shorter stitch. So you can see here's what the double crochet looks like, and here's what the half double crochet looks like. It's pretty much just a matter of preference. And I meant to mention this on the sleeve as well, but if you're a beginner crocheter, it can be helpful to use a stitch marker to mark the beginning of your row. So just attach the stitch marker to your very first stitch, and then you'll know once you've gotten all the way around to it. But I'm just going to continue making half double crochets all the way around the neckline until I come back to the beginning of my row. So I'm coming to the end of the row here. I'm just going to do my last stitch and then make a slip stitch into the place where my stitch marker is. And then cut the yarn. And depending on your preference, you can leave it at this with just kind of the border on the neckline and the arms. But I think I'm going to add another border at the bottom. So I'm going to start with a slip knot, same as before, and start on one of the edges. do a row of single crochets. And then once I finish the row of single crochets, I'll decide if I'm going to do double crochets or half double crochets for my second row. And for this edge, I think I'm going to do 1 single crochet into every stitch, because unlike the armholes, I don't want this to kind of taper in the same way. So I have decided to actually do just a second row of single crochets at the bottom here. But this is just up to you based on what looks good with your yarn weight and kind of what you're looking for texture at the bottom. So I'm going to finish the second row of single crochets and then show you how I weave in some of my ends, and then that's it. So to weave in your ends, you're going to thread your yarn needle, not like that. You're going to thread your yarn needle, and then on the parts that are on the crochet borders, I like to just kind of weave down and then across. And then back across the other direction. The idea is to just kind of secure the ends so that even when the garment stretches, they don't pull out and get exposed. So that's pretty good. I'm going to trim that. Yeah, so I'm just gonna go through and weave in all of the ends. If you want a more in-depth look at how I weave in the ends, I do have a little section at the end of my color work video, which I will link down below if you're interested, but just weave them in whatever way works for you, and then you'll be done.